Our featured BBB Wise Giving Alliance accredited charity seal holders for this episode are Ronald McDonald's House Charities of Eastern Wisconsin, Sea International, Sub-Zero Mission. To find out more about these and other BBB Wise Giving Alliance accredited charity seal holders, go to give.org.
You're listening to the Heart of Giving podcast with Art Taylor, powered by bbbgive.org. Here we explore the motivations that form the basis of giving and service. We inspire generosity and celebrate the transformative effects that giving and service have on the human spirit and on community. The conversations featured on the podcast also uncover giving strategies that educate and provide tools to help listeners make impactful gifts of both their time and money. We hope you enjoy this episode.
This is the Heart of Giving podcast, powered by bbbgive.org. Give.org is the nation's standards-based charity evaluator, and it's your one-stop source for information on giving and reports on the most asked about charities. I'm Art Taylor. Today, our guest is Leah Henck. And Leah is working in a really challenging space, I'd like to think. But let me just tell you a little bit about her, and then we'll get into our conversation today. She's an MBA, which she finished back in 2008, and then joined her husband in India in January of 2009. And together they spent 7 years serving with a firm called the Freedom Firm in Pune. And during that time, Leah and Mala worked together to found Ruhama Designs. It's a business dedicated to providing rescued women a healthy, sustainable livelihood. And upon returning to the U.S., Leah turned her focus to running after 3 active, beautiful children. And I have 3 grandchildren. So I get some cred, but I don't get anywhere near the cred you get. And through unexpected events, Leah rejoined the work of Freedom Firm in USA. First as treasurer and now as president. Today she finds incredible joy in the privilege to stand as one of the team reaching out hands of hope and healing girls forgotten and abused. So we're going to talk about trafficking with Leah. Leah, welcome to the Heart of Giving podcast.
Thank you, Art. I'm happy to be with you today.
Well, there's a little bit in your bio about how you all got started with this, but it's not quite sufficient for what I'd like to know. So I want to figure out, if you don't mind telling us, where did this impetus come from? First, to go back to India and work with the team that you worked with, and then to come back to the United States and focus on it on a more full-time basis.
Well, ever since I was a kid, I had a heart for speaking up for those who had no voice, for fighting for justice, for being a protector. I had a younger sister. I always felt like a second mother to her. But as I grew and as I started to figure out where I wanted to go in the world and what I wanted to study, what I truly wanted to do was come alongside an organization to help to support and enable and empower their vision. And so my childhood tendencies, wanting to be a help and a protection, and then these later studies really came together well in the work that I got to do later in my life. Trafficking was something I actually had never even heard of, had no idea that this still existed, that slavery still existed in the world today. And what's incredible is when you look at trafficking, you hear those statistics that actually we have more slaves in the world today than at any other point in history, which tomorrow we celebrate Juneteenth, which was the end, the official end of slavery in the United States as we know it. And yet even in our own country, we know that there are oppressed, that there are those enslaved. My husband was the first to introduce me to trafficking. Before we're even dating or anything else, he told me a story about his first time in India. He had gone to meet who were the founders of Freedom Firm, a couple named Greg and Mala Malstead, and gone and spent a summer with them in India, just as they were beginning their work in the front lines of fighting trafficking in India. And he was so impressed and so challenged by what they were doing that he went again as a legal intern and helped them. And then he had just finished law school when he decided to seek a position, to seek a job with them. It was at that point that I met him. And so he's excited. This is his vision for his future. This is where he's headed. And he begins to tell me about what he has seen and what he has experienced in this place. And I was both shocked, but also deeply impacted by just the fact that there are young girls still trafficked, that there are young girls who are oppressed against their will, forced into prostitution, because the work of Freedom Firm is specifically against sex trafficking. So my husband he got the job in India. He was on his way to head and work in this issue to fight directly against sex trafficking of minor girls in India. I continued finishing my MBA in the US. And then when I completed that, I joined him in India and began to seek, where could I help in this particular evil? And so I spent time alongside of Mala Malstead, who was the co-founder of Freedom Firm. And the business expertise that I had gained through my studies, I was able to use that to help Mala found a business that really was meant to be an in-between, a first step for girls who had already been rescued, had already spent time in restoration and shelter homes, but needed that first step back into healthy society. And so we created a business to employ these women, hopefully as a bridge employment, and we worked with that for a number of years. But my husband was always on the side of the direct intervention. Freedom Firm does specifically rescue, restoration, and justice is their goal. And so they seek and rescue girls directly from trafficking and then continue to follow them along those roads.
So Leah, tell me then how the organization is structured and what its specific mission is. And we can get into some of the programming that you do as well. But let's talk about that for a minute.
So Freedom Firm is unique in that it was actually founded first in India. It has an Indian board of trustees. The organization operates from there, and they have the goal to end child sex trafficking in India. So it's a very specific focus of sex trafficking of minor girls and the location being India. And they've always had a mobile team method of just going to wherever the problem is, addressing the problem. And then once there is enough cases in a particular area, then they will form a local office to continue to address those. But otherwise, the team continues to move and go to wherever the problem is to address it. And so they go throughout India. Today, we have 6 regional offices, and the teams in those 6 regional offices will travel a circumference around each of those offices or travel to other regions to support those teams.
Wow. When I think about this issue, it kind of makes your stomach turn to some extent. When you think about what could be happening to young children, girls in particular here. But it also means that there's a fair amount of courage to deal with these really bad people that has to happen.
Mm-hmm.
How does your organization go about addressing the people responsible for this heinous criminal activity?
Well, as I said, our 3-pronged approach is rescue, restoration, and justice. Everything is focused around that one victim, that particular girl, rescuing her following up with her, with social workers, bringing therapy and trauma-informed responses to her, helping her to move on in her life. But that third point of justice is really what we believe is the crucial point, is the only thing that can change an area, a region, that can stop the flow of corrupt activity and can protect future girls. We believe that holding the perpetrators accountable for their crime will raise the risk level so high that it's no longer lucrative. It's no longer a good business decision to sell minor girls. And so we pursue justice in each of these cases. We do that by opposing bail from the very first so that an accused perpetrator will be held. Then we follow that case throughout and fight for a conviction. You know, statistics are sometimes difficult things. You can pull numbers from different points to say different things. But this was a pretty hard number and statistic that we found in our work, which was that 89% of trafficking cases in India end in acquittal, not conviction, acquittal.
89%.
89. And so sometimes it's a catch and release. There's not always the will to uphold the law. The laws themselves in India are actually very good. There's no issue with what is on the books. The issue is with the implementation of that law. And so our team comes alongside to guide the police department through, these are the sections that you should be adding to the charge sheet. We come alongside a public prosecutor to say, let us help you with case law. Let us help you with other examples that will help to strengthen your argument. We come alongside of the girl, the victim, to strengthen her and help her to have the courage to be able to speak up, because we know that it is through her testimony that the conviction can occur. It's on her back, unfortunately, that future protection rests. And so we come alongside each of these parties to try to strengthen the justice system, because we truly believe that is where the key lies.
I would think so, because otherwise it's more catch and release if there's no penalty associated with it.
Mm-hmm. And while 89% is a discouraging number, perhaps, we actually have a lot of hope, because we have seen, we've worked since 2006. And so, I mean, that's 18 years now. Yeah. In 18 years, we have only seen 14 convictions. Only 14.
What?
We have hundreds of cases, but we have only seen 14 convictions. But every conviction has just powerful repercussions in the area. And so I try to encourage people with, though it is such a low number, it's a tidal wave of effect. And so, for example,
explain that to me. Yeah, give me more about the tidal wave effect.
Sure. Yeah. So when we first worked, the very first regional office was in the city of Pune. And when we went there, the reason that we set up the first regional office is that there were minor girls standing openly for sale on the road. It was not difficult to find them. And so we began working in that area, bringing the issue to the police, case after case after case, continuing to build. But it wasn't until we had the very first conviction that we began to see a change. But after that first conviction, suddenly you could not find minor girls being sold on the road any longer. However, they were still available hidden inside. So then you keep working. Then the second conviction came, and you could no longer find girls for sale inside. But they were still available to those known. They were still special requests. So you keep working. Finally, the third conviction, they're no longer available. It has moved. The cost and the risk has grown so high that they know they cannot do that in this city any longer. It changed the region. We've seen that in other regions. We saw it in a very, very difficult region of Nagpur. When we began in the city of Nagpur, the corruption was so great. These were the youngest girls we had ever seen, just standing openly. And again, it was a catch and release of the girls. And it was a revolving door. They were being rescued, And then within 2 weeks, they were standing back on the road again. And so we had to continue to address that system. And it took about 5 years until we reached a tipping point in that area. But now we've been working in Nagpur for 12 years. And today we have seen where you can no longer find minors. And not only that, but the police themselves are upholding the law. They themselves are shutting down areas where they find this problem. We have had the deputy commissioner of Pune, one of the higher level government officials, has stated that trafficking is one of the main concerns of their government. And so it has taken time. And yet that is another area where the issue was so deeply embedded that others who saw it said it was impossible. But it was not impossible. As you continue to hit it step by step, today we have seen an entire 180 turnabout in that region.
And now it's time for our Giving Tips segment with Bennett Weiner, one of the world's most renowned experts on charity accountability and the COO of the BBB Wise Giving Alliance.
Today I'd like to talk to you about environmental organizations. These groups have, for quite some time, been the subject of increasing interest from the donating public. But of course, you really can't tell what the organization does based on the name alone. And it's helpful to know the major categories of these types of groups so you can make an informed giving decision. And I'd like to talk about 5 categories of the types of environmental organizations that we report on. One is environmental protection, research, and advocacy. And these organizations work to restore and maintain the quality of our environment. A wide range of activities such as research, influence on public policy. They may tackle issues ranging on pollution and other areas. But environmental protection, research, and advocacy is the first category. The second is natural resource conservation. And charities in this group are dedicated to safeguarding natural spaces and resources from abuse, neglect, and waste or exploitation. And these groups can work dealing with forest land or deserts or wetlands or rivers, oceans, and other environments. The third category is environmental education. And here, organizations are engaging with people to address issues concerning nature or building appreciation for the environment and a variety of approaches in that area in the classroom or with the general public. But they are dealing with, again, educational objectives about the environment. Fourth is raising funds for various environmental causes. Some charities may actually serve as a conduit in which you give to them and they distribute donations to a number of environmental charities in different areas. And that's another approach that some organizations use in raising funds for this cause. And finally, the fifth area is wildlife protection and endangered species. And these organizations may seek to influence public policy or enhance natural ecosystems to promote laws that protect a particular species and things along those lines. Those are 5 different major categories of environmental groups that one can consider. Of course, when considering donating to any environmental organization, I encourage you to go to give.org to see if the subject charity meets the 20 BBB charity standards.
I applaud your doggedness to make sure that you stuck with it long enough to make the kind of change. And this is an area that I like to discuss with some of my guests, because we see in our society people who want to make change, but are often frustrated by how long it can take. And they look at the problem and they say, it's intractable. I don't have the time. I don't want to spend my entire life. I thought I could just get into this and fix it right now. And people right now are probably thinking, well, what can I do to change my community? And they may not have a sense of how long it takes to really create lasting change. What was it that allowed you to persevere in this way? And what was your thinking really when you got involved? Were you one of the people who thought, we can get in here in a couple of years, we can turn this thing around? And if you did think that, what was the point at which you said, it's probably not going to happen tomorrow, but we got to stick with it?
Yeah, there were definitely the ups and downs of fighting trafficking. My first year in this work was the darkest of my life. I can honestly say that. I had never seen such evil. I had never seen such discouragement. I had never seen such darkness. And so it was a difficult place to come out of. But after about a year, where you just kind of see one step forward, two steps back, fighting against those you thought were on the same team with you, corruption where it should not be. After seeing all those things, finally, after about a year, I began to see glimmers. I began to not only see the darkness, but I began to see glimmers of hope. I began to see an officer who was willing to do the right thing, who was willing to stand up against corruption, even within their own bureau. I began to see a girl who was willing to change, who began to have hope for her future. It was these small glimmers that began to give you hope that, hey, something is happening. There is hope. There is the possibility of change. And so it is that doggedness. You refuse to give up and you keep pressing forward. And when you do that, eventually you see change. And so it by no means is it easy or quick, yet it's also not complicated. It's not complicated.
Say more about that. Say more about that.
It's not rocket science to figure out what to do. Freedom Firm's work is not very complicated. We do rescue, restoration, and justice. And we refuse to move and we refuse to back down. And so...
But you're talking about police forces, right? You're talking about people who are government officials who are standing in the way of the safety and freedom of little girls. And many of them are probably, would it be fair to say they were profiting from this too? Or would that be outside the realm of?
I think it would be fair. It would be fair to say that.
Okay. So you're fighting a system. You're not just fighting some thugs. Well, thugs in the system, thugs part of the system. That takes a lot of courage and it takes a lot of fortitude to deal with that. So I want to understand from your perspective, where does that come from? Because maybe you were threatened. I don't know. I can imagine. I could certainly see you feeling at some point, maybe these people will come after me because there's a lot of vested interest, even if not physically, they may come after you in a lot of different ways to try to hurt you in some way, to try to discredit you for what you're doing.
Yeah, we have certainly faced all of that. I'd like to tell you about two of our staff members in leading up to that. But one, her name is Asha. Today, she's the regional director for our work in Nagpur. And her name actually means hope, which I love. It's a great comparison of who she is. But when we first hired her as a social worker, the very first social worker for that region, she was the only one working there. Our team would travel and support her, but she was the consistent on the ground, going in to meet the girls in the shelter home. And then the team grew around her. When I first met her, I thought, she's too nice. She's too simple. I just don't know how long she's going to last. It's a tough job. Many people we see only last 2 to 3 years in this work. She's now lasted over 12. So I was wrong when I saw her, but she had something in her that I did not see in the beginning. Though she was simple, she was focused in her task. She knew that if she just stood, if she just refused to give up, if she just continued to stand and continue to seek those who would help. Yes, this person, this government official might be corrupt, but they are not all corrupt. There are good people in the system. And so working to rebuild and bring healing to the system is something that we seek to do. But though she was simple, though she was not charismatic and someone that you would look at and think, oh, this person's going to change the world, yet she has changed her region. And she's done that through a patient perseverance. She has done that through refusing to lose hope and refusing to give up. And there have been times, most certainly, where things got much, much harder before they got any better. I think for us in this work, when we look at those situations, we have to look back at Pune and at Nagpur, because we continue to work in other areas where it is still difficult, where we have yet to see the tide turn. But we can look at these places and say, but the tide did turn. It was that bad, but we saw change. And when we refuse to back down and we have that patient step-by-step perseverance, you can't stand against that.
Well, it's interesting. I'm slightly changing the subject a bit because I'm always fascinated by people who particularly start out in business like you did, right? You have your MBA. And when you're in business school, they're giving you all of the formulas and the processes and the best practices and ways of being successful managing a business, the financial aspect of it, how to be profitable. And all those things matter. But what you don't have maybe is the reason to do something when it doesn't make sense, when it doesn't make business sense, right? Mm-hmm. You're taught to make business sense in business school. And fighting a corrupt system that's entrenched in a particular country halfway around the globe doesn't make business sense. And so I'm just so curious to know what you would say to your professors who would probably say to you, some of them might say to you, you must have been out of your mind to even try something like this. It doesn't make sense. But that's the difference between thinking with your brain and acting maybe with your heart. And even in business, I guess you have to have some of that, right? You still have to be willing to take risks, but your risks are calculated. Where's the calculation in this? I don't see it. What I see is someone saying, screw it. We're just going to save these girls, whatever it takes. That doesn't make business sense. Where does that come from?
I think it most certainly comes from an internal motivation, and I can share with you that my own internal motivation is that I believe every person has intrinsic value. I believe that I personally am a Christian, and so I believe that God has given intrinsic value to every human being, and that no human being has the right to oppress another. It's when we devalue humanity, it's when we say someone is an other or a subhuman that allows atrocities to occur. But that's not the truth. The truth is that we are each intrinsically valuable. And so whether you ever fully fix the system is really not the question. That's your goal. That's your goal. Our goal is to end child sex trafficking in India. Will we ever see it completely eradicated? Perhaps not in my lifetime, but that does not negate the fact that every single girl that we work for has intrinsic value, and that no one has the right to imprison, oppress, hurt, make her into a commodity. And so it is that belief that carries us forward, that we are not just working for the changing of a system, but that we are working for a life. And that starfish analogy is much overused, but it is true. It mattered to that one. There was an incredibly encouraging moment for me recently. My husband and I moved back to the U.S. 8 years ago after we had spent 7 years in India. And I've again been able to work for Freedom Firm from the U.S. side, which is just such an incredible privilege for myself. But when we were in India, it was still in the dark, difficult days of the time in Nagpur, the days when the girls were a catch and release. We rescued one girl 3 times until we finally were able to transfer her to another location, another home, where she was able to be kept safe. But I never heard the end of her story. I didn't know, was she released again? Did we lose her? Because that happens. We lose battles as well as win battles. And so recently I was talking with Asha, who I mentioned, and just asked her, do you know whatever happened to that girl? Was she lost? Is she back in prostitution? Is she dead? Could happen after 12 years. And I asked her, I said, do you know what happened? And she's like, yes, she is the encouragement to our work. She today is married, has 4 children of her own. Her husband has a prosperous farm. They're building their own home. She sent me some pictures of a time when they had visited her recently. And this girl was showing things she had sewn herself. And I was overcome with gratitude that we didn't give up after 1 time or 2 times or even 3 times. We continued to fight for this girl, and it made a difference in that girl's life. And so after hearing that story, I thought about, what if we had given up after 2 times? What if we said it's too hard? She would not have this beautiful life that she has today. And so again, full circle, hindsight's 2020, but when you get to have that long view of what has been accomplished in a region because of perseverance, of what's been accomplished for a particular life, you can honestly measure and say it was worth it. And it helps you to press forward.
Leah, tell me organizationally how you go about planning this work. So do you get together at the beginning of the year and say, we're going to work a region, or we're going to look at where the problems are and we're going to focus our resources here? How do you rationalize the work that you do and the resources that you have and deploy them?
Well, as I mentioned, we're kind of a backward organization from many that you may talk to, in that the organization in India actually tells us what they are doing.
Okay.
They have their brainstorming. So whereas it was founded by Greg and Mala Malstead, who Mala is American, but she was actually born in India, so had this strong connection to India. But they also had left after just a couple years after my husband and I had left due to some various circumstances. So today, the organization in India is entirely Indian-led, Indian trustees, staffed by Indians. They have taken this mission and DNA into themselves, and they are saying, we are going to change our country. We are going to make sure that this does not continue. So they meet. Like I said, we have our 6 regional offices, and they look at what has been happening in those areas. They look at which cities they believe there are still significant problems. They look at which areas they've been traveling to, doing initial investigations, and where do they think they may grow or expand, and where the needs are. And based upon that experience over the past year, they make their expectations, their goals for the next year. Then they communicate that to me. This is what we are planning to do. This is what our goals are. This is what we believe our financial needs will be. They themselves do some of their own fundraising, both within India. They've been able to get a very prominent granting fund from within India who's beginning to support their work, as well as some European organizations. But we in the US are actually still one of the primary fundraisers for them. So they tell me what their goals are, and they communicate that and what their needs are. And I bring that to my board and we agree. But one of our sayings, one of our mottos is our all for every one. We still believe that every one girl is worth the work. And so we don't really have a calculation of, if it goes over this, we can't do that. Or if we don't make the number of rescues, then we're in trouble. We really are looking at, are we making headway? Are we pressing forward? Are we trying? Again, with most nonprofits, it's like this, how can you truly put metrics to it? But we try. But we look at, are they doing the pieces necessary that we believe will break through in a region? Maybe we've only seen 1 or 2 successful rescues, but I'll bet you they have tried 20 times. So are we seeing the action necessary to lead us towards that goal? And If it took 20 times to reach one rescue, that's okay.
Wow. Well, what do you need? I mean, there's a obvious need that you have for something to do your work more effectively, to continue your work. What is that?
I believe that there's hope in this work. I always try to communicate that to people, that this is not a battle that you fight simply because it ought to be fought. But I truly believe that you can bring change. But I do think that we work as a body. We work as a team. And in a body, you have the different functions. We could not accomplish ending sex trafficking in India without the team in India. They also cannot accomplish their work without us. It's in our partnership together that we can see headway made. And so I also speak to people who connect with us in the U.S. to give them hope that it's not only lip service, but that they truly, truly are a part of this team, of this body. And that as we pull together, whether it's through prayer or finances or raising awareness that this is an issue, because still many people don't realize what an issue around the world trafficking is. Each of these pieces work together and each person works together. And so I do invite people to join us financially, to join this team, but also to join in whatever way they can. If they can't do things financially, then please help us to spread awareness of the issue. If they are a person who prays, please pray for the strength and the perseverance of our team. We are upholding them together.
Well, to all of our listeners, let me just tell you, you've heard an amazing testimony here about what's going on with child trafficking in India and what's being done about it by the wonderful heart that you've been listening to, Leah Henck, and her family of supporters and family of teammates that are working there. And you've also heard her request to you to be supportive in any way that you can be. And I just want to say to Leah, persevere, stay with it. And we're so glad that you stuck with it this long, because you've made a difference and you're making a difference. So this is the Heart of Giving podcast, and this is a weekly show. We bring a new episode every week. And if you're listening for the first time and you'd like to get involved, you can do so by subscribing to the show. We really appreciate that. Also, if you'd like to make a contribution, you can do that by going to our website, give.org, which is the website for the BBB Wise Giving Alliance. You can make a gift there, and we will certainly appreciate it and put it to great use. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you back here next week.
You've just listened to the Heart of Giving podcast with Art Taylor. Be sure to tune in next time for a brand new episode. To listen to our other interviews, visit heartgiving.podbean.com. That's heartgiving.podbean.com. Subscribe to our show on major podcast platforms. The thoughts and opinions expressed on this podcast are the views and opinions of the guests, not those of the BBB Wise Giving Alliance or program affiliates. This podcast is for information and educational purposes only and is copyrighted with all rights reserved. This podcast is protected by Podbean's terms of service.